I was 6 years old when my mother looked down at me in the mall food court, smiled in a way that did not reach her eyes, said, "I wait here for 1 minute," and walked away. The carousel of lights and the smell of cinnamon pretzels blurred as the parking lot swallowed their car. I sat on a scuffed bench holding a purple stuffed rabbit with a torn ear and tried to count to 60 like I had been taught. That minute was not a mistake. It was a choice that took decades to name. Years later, a man who found me there left me something they never expected. Then my parents came back to my life with lawyers and a demand for $1.7 million. They sued me for money that belonged to the man who raised me. This is how abandonment turned into a courtroom showdown, and how I turned that fight into a life of protecting other children. My name is Ava Turner. I am 34 years old, and I work as a civil rights attorney focusing on child welfare cases. I will tell you the whole story, from the smell of the food court to the grainy footage that changed the verdict in court, and to the foundation I founded afterwards. Stay with me to the end to see the recording that silenced a courtroom and the choice I made with the inheritance that people thought to take back. The mall smelled like fryer oil and lemon cleaner. I remember the sticky of the bench under my legs and the way the overhead music skipped a record beat. I remember watching my mother walk through a window of reflections, each one smaller than the last, until there was only an empty parking space and my rabbit. I did not know what abandonment meant then. I only knew the panic that made my small hands tremble. Shoppers passed without pity. An older man in a gray cardigan sat beside me and asked if I was lost. His name was Thomas Reed. He rinsed his hands, lifted me to his lap, and called the information desk. He carried the warmth of coffee on his breath and the faint smell of motor oil from his car. A security guard came, a woman with a braid named Erin Brooks. She took my name on a scrap of paper and let me stay beside Thomas until social services arrived. Cameras in the mall recorded the time. A security tape, later labeled 142311, would become central evidence. The tape showed a small girl alone on a bench, the doors of a blue sedan closing, and a woman walking past a kiosk without looking back. That file sat dormant for years until a lawyer opened a box of papers that changed everything. When I talk about the incident, I hear now the tinny echo of the mall speakers, the squawk of a tannoy, and the distant. I remember the rasp of the cardboard on my rabbit, the taste of a stale grape from a juice box my adoptive father bought me that afternoon, and the cool metal of the bench rim against my legs. These sensations anchored the memory and made it impossible to smooth over. After the social workers took my statement, the city placed me in emergency housing, and a foster mother named Isabel Price arranged the paperwork that led to Thomas being approved as a guardian. Thomas was not wealthy in the way people imagine. He worked as a machinist at a local plant and fixed old radios on weekends. He did not have a high school diploma, but he had patience in great supply and a laugh that made me feel safe. He took me home that evening and taught me how to make toast without burning it, how to tie my shoes so the loops did not slip, and how to fold my rabbit's ear so it looked like new. He insisted I call him Dad. I resisted. One night, after many months, when I cried because I missed a vague memory of a different mother, he sat me on his knees and said, "This is what family looks like when someone chooses to stay." His choice built a life for me. It also, without his knowledge, created a legal target when he died. My childhood with Thomas was ordinary and miraculous all at once. Our house smelled of wood polish and boiled beans. The dog named Juno snored at the foot of the sofa, and the radio played old jazz stations that he insisted I listen to so I could appreciate chord changes. School mornings were hurried. He would hand me a thermos and check my backpack twice. I learned to be precise with words because he loved order, and to be stubborn because he believed stubbornness kept you standing. I fought through adolescent shame about being adopted by a man some labeled eccentric. I learned in high school to translate hurt into effort. I read everything I could about law and rights. College was a blur of late nights, diner coffee, and internships at legal aid clinics. At 28, I passed the bar. My early cases were on behalf of families who could not afford representation. I wanted to give voice to those who had been pushed to the edges, children like the child I had been. Thomas would call out from the kitchen when I studied late and tell me to get some rest. He did not live long enough to see me win a major case. When he died, his will arrived like a comet. The reading of Thomas Reed's will became public in a way neither I nor my biological parents anticipated. Thomas left his house, a small retirement account, and an irrevocable trust named in my honor. The trust was carefully written. It included a clause that, after certain conditions, it would transfer $1.7 million to me. The phrase in the trust said the resources were to be used for the care and education of the child known as Ava Turner and for the outreach and shelter work I may choose to pursue. The trust had been advised by a lawyer named Leela Shaw and documented by accountant Mateo Cruz. When the will was read, the local paper ran a story. My biological parents, Karen Morrison and Daniel Morrison, who had absorbed the first pages of my life like a silence for decades, read that story and came forward. They did not come to sit with me and share memories. They came with a claim filed by an attorney named Mark Bennett, alleging undue possession and seeking distribution. They said I was stolen and that I belonged to them by blood. They sued for control. They filed for a partition of the estate, claiming malicious deception. The headline the next day read, "Abandoned Child Sued by Parents for Inheritance." I have to step back here and tell you about the people who orbit this story because they did not exist only as background. They acted, they testified, they tried to take what Thomas gave. First, there is Leela Shaw, the estate attorney who wrote the trust. She is cool and direct and taught me the meaning of precise phrasing in wills. She kept notes and copies of drafts. Second, Mateo Cruz, the forensic accountant who later traced accounts and found transfers. Third, Aaron Brooks, the security officer at the mall who logged my presence the day I was found. Fourth, Rachel Kim, a reporter at the Times who covered the will and later came to court to publish a thread of documents. Fifth, Judge Henry Alvarez, who presided at the hearing. Sixth, Mark Bennett, the attorney for my biological parents, who brought the suit. Seventh, a neighbor named Carlos Gonzalez, who testified about Thomas's repairs and routine. Eighth, a social worker named Denise Coleman, who handled my early placement files. Each of these people held an object, a paper, a memory that the case pivoted on. The incident of abandonment required me to relive details I had buried. In the beginning, my testimony consisted of small child fragments, the sound of people, the taste of grape, a woman walking away. As we prepared for court, I read and listened to reports that became evidence. I watched security footage. I met with Aaron Brooks, who had logged me as found and kept a list of names. Mailed receipts, adoption paperwork, hospital forms, and foster intake files became a map. There were emails from social services, notes from a neighbor who saw my biological mother arguing at a doorstep weeks before. There were a dozen documents pretended to be simple, but which, when stacked, told a deliberate story about who had done what and when. It was in those layers that the narrative of abandonment became undeniable rather than a convenient story for others to manipulate. Sitting in my kitchen the night I opened Thomas Reed's trust, I remembered the metallic whisper of the envelope opening, the lamplight spreading like a pool on the table, and the sound my own breathing made in my ears. The first line of the trust said the grantor, Thomas Reed, declared his intent that the beneficiary, Ava Turner, receive support and that in the event of contest by biological next of kin, that contest shall be subject to enhanced burden of proof. There it was, a clause almost defensive in its tone, as if Thomas anticipated someone would come later and try to claim him. I remember feeling a strange mix of grief and protection. I called Lila. Her voice came through measured and quick. We agreed to secure an injunction to prevent any transfer of assets while we prepared a response. When the letters arrived from Bennett's office, his words were sharp and clinical. They accused me of having been removed illegally and alleged that Thomas had been misled in his capacity as guardian. The accusation felt like a second abandonment, but this time cloaked in legal language. We began the work of preparing the defense. The first major scene of dialogue was a consultation in Lila Shaw's office where we decided strategy. This exchange, recorded below, is edited for clarity but reflects the extended back and forth we had across several meetings. Lila Shaw. We have a trust that specifies you as beneficiary and an enhanced burden clause. We will file to intervene and block any transfer. Ava Turner. Will the injunction hold? I am afraid they will clog the estate with motions and stall. Injunctions can hold if we show a likelihood of success and irreparable harm. You have security footage and social services records that show placement was lawful. The footage is grainy. They will say it does not prove intent to abandon. Intent will be inferred from the totality of circumstances. The mall tape shows repeated movement and a vehicle leaving with no return. What about Karen and Daniel? How do we handle their claim emotionally and legally? We will keep this focused on facts. Emotion can be manipulated in court. We will call Aaron Brooks and the social worker who placed you. And the trust clause? Can Bennett claim undue influence on Thomas before he died? He will try. We will show Thomas' capacity and his long history of care. We will produce his emails, receipts, and testimonials. You should expect aggressive litigation. That conversation multiplied into many more over months. Each exchange added more documents to our file and more people to our list of witnesses. We interviewed neighbors, former coworkers, and a former supervisor from Thomas's plant. We reconstructed Thomas' daily routine with Carlos Gonzalez, who mowed the lawn across the fence. He described the regularity of teacups, the repetition of radio songs, the way Thomas counted screws while working on machines. Those small domestic details would later speak to Thomas's capacity and deliberate choice. We then assembled a set of sensory-anchored scenes to anchor testimonies. One scene occurred at the mall with Aaron Brooks and the security office. We recreated the bench where I had sat. The air still smelled faintly of fries and the sunscreen people wore. Aaron touched the bench where my small knees pressed and described the scratch mark near the edge that the tape captured perfectly. She said she remembered the way my fingers clung to a purple rabbit. Sight, sound, smell, touch, and taste returned with detail as she spoke. The exchange with Aaron that day was long and full of memory. Aaron Brooks. I remember the time because the PA system kept skipping, and the vendor near the bench shouted at a child for spilling. Ava Turner. Did you write my name down? Aaron Brooks. Yes, I have the intake sheet in my folder. You wrote your name when we asked you to. You were quiet. Ava Turner. Did you see my mother leave? Aaron Brooks. Yes, she walked by a kiosk. She did not look back. Ava Turner. Did you record the time? Aaron Brooks. We time-stamped the tape at 14:23:11. I remember because it was the 4 o'clock closing of the kiosk shift. Ava Turner. That tape shows the car leaving? Aaron Brooks. Yes, the shuttle pulled out and a blue sedan left the lot. The camera captured the doors closing. Ava Turner. Did you speak to the driver of the sedan? Aaron Brooks. No, the driver came back later to say they had not seen anything. The rich textures of these small things mattered in court. We built a chronology with tactile evidence and human testimony. The defense also relied on documentary proof. Lila secured emails Thomas had saved in a folder called For Ava and proofs of his bank statements. Mateo Cruz, the forensic accountant, traced transactions that showed the financial life Thomas led, modest but steady. Mateo produced a concise but technical chain of custody report for the key evidence. Chain of custody description. The security footage was obtained directly from mall archives, cataloged with timestamps, exported to a secure drive, and logged with metadata, including original file name, retrieval agent name and signature, and hash codes verifying no alteration. Financial statements were retrieved from Thomas Reed's bank with subpoena, copies certified by bank clerk with date and identification. Each item was stored in a locked evidence bag and logged into an evidence register indicating custody transfers. This procedure ensured admissibility and integrity of files. The chain of custody note was brief and exact and helped prevent claims of tampering. As we moved toward the hearing, the motion filings multiplied. Mark Bennett filed a complaint alleging that Thomas had knowingly withheld information and that the adoption was procured with misrepresentation. He produced a trauma-laden narrative about desperate parents who had been coerced by social services. In the initial hearing, the judge allowed parts of Bennett's pleadings to stand, citing procedural questions. The defendant posture of my biological parents created a moral fog that the court had to navigate with law and not emotion. That fog is what makes these cases so painful publicly. You can feel empathy tug at you even when facts are clear. The opposition painted themselves as victims of circumstance and us as opportunists. We had to be methodical and patient. One of the largest tensions of the pretrial period took place when an anonymous email surfaced with photos of a childhood document that looked like a relinquishment. The email was sent to the paper and to my mother, and it threatened to change public perception overnight. I remember the heat of anger when I read the header, the dim light of my office reflected on my computer screen, and the bitter aftertaste of coffee. Leela called an emergency strategy session. The moment required a choice to either pursue the person who leaked or to contain damage by refocusing on authenticated records. We chose both. Matthew and Rachel Kim worked to verify the provenance of the photos, and Mateo cross-referenced handwriting on the paper. The documents were found to be forged. The forger had attempted to mimic my mother's signature from a hospital form, but missed dates. When Matthew traced the originating IP, he found it came from a public library computer. The leak had been meant to intimidate, and it almost worked. A second high-tension scene occurred at the deposition of my biological mother, Karen Morrison. The depositions are, in legal terms, where people are asked to speak under oath before trial. They can be a place where truth or fabrication reveals itself. We sat in a conference room that smelled of disinfectant. The tape recorder was on. I remember the way the fluorescent light hummed and how my pulse measured in my ears as Karen spoke. Mark Bennett: Karen, did you leave Ava at the mall? Karen Morrison: I did not mean to leave her. It was supposed to be quick. I had to run an errand. Mark Bennett: Did you return within the hour? Karen Morrison: No, there were complications. I panicked, and I shamefully left. I did not know what else to do. Ava Turner: Did you contact any relatives or call back to the mall? Karen Morrison: I cannot remember. I was in a bad place. I had no money. I was scared. Why did you not look for her at the designated information desk when you found her missing? Karen Morrison: I was too shamefaced to go back. Mark Bennett: Did you attempt to reclaim guardianship when you were first notified about placement? Karen Morrison: I did not get the notice. I did not have an address at the time. Ava Turner: Did you ever attempt to visit after she was placed in foster care? Karen Morrison: Not until recently. Her testimony was shaky. But shaky testimony does not equate to forged intent. We had to show more. We had to show that Thomas had acted within good faith and with capacity. Testimony from neighbors, coworkers, and social workers began to build a picture of a man who visited the library with me, who took me to school fairs, who fixed a squeaky hinge on my bicycle and tightened the bolts on a leaning gate. Carlos Gonzalez testified about the time Thomas came with a bucket of soup when the neighbor was ill. And Denise Coleman, the social worker, confirmed the paperwork that resulted in placement had gone through regular processes. Each witness added color and proof that the adoption was not a theft, but a series of decisions made in law and in heart. As the trial approached, media attention intensified. Rachel Kim ran a long piece about the trust and about Thomas Reed as an unlikely guardian. She published photographs of him at the community center and an interview with Juno, if you can imagine how gently humorous that was. Public reaction was mixed. Some readers wrote in with sympathy, others with skepticism. Social media became an arena for judgment where nuance evaporated. That pressure weighed heavily on my family and on me. It made simple acts like grocery shopping heavy with the fear of being recognized and labeled. I learned to walk with the quiet restraint of someone carrying a secret not entirely their own. The courtroom itself was a separate world. Judge Henry Alvarez presided with a patient but firm voice. Courtroom scenes require certain rituals of presence: the rustle of papers, the embroidered gavel on the bench, the mute click of pens. The room smelled faintly of wax and year-old polish. The gallery filled with neighbors, folks from Thomas's plant, and a handful of protesters who carried signs about rightful parents and about fraud. The main day of trial, where evidence was presented and witnesses called, had the gravity of theater but the consequence of life. The most important evidence we had was the security footage, the trust document, Thomas emails, and Mateo Cruz's financial report. The courtroom exchange during the presentation of the video proof was a peak moment with multiple dialogues and reactions. The following is an extended representation of that exchange. Judge Henry Alvarez. Counsel, present the evidence. Lila Shaw. Your Honor, we call Erin Brooks to the stand to authenticate the mall surveillance footage and to testify to her custodial receipts. Erin Brooks. I have been employed at the mall security for 11 years. I logged the footage and kept original files. Mark Bennett. Objection as to foundation. Judge Henry Alvarez. Overruled. Proceed. Lila Shaw. Erin, do you recognize the person in the footage? Erin Brooks. Yes, that is the child seated on the bench at 14:23:11. Lila Shaw. And the woman who walks away in the footage? The footage. Do you recognize her from any interactions? I see her pass by a kiosk. I cannot identify her beyond what the tape shows. Mark Bennett. The tape is grainy. It is not conclusive of intent. We object to inferring abandonment. Lila Shaw. We state that the totality of circumstances, including the taped exit of a blue sedan, the timestamps, the lack of return, and the corroborating witness testimony, establish that the child was left. Judge Henry Alvarez. The jury will be instructed to consider the footage as part of the record. Move to the next piece of evidence. Ava Turner. Your Honor, may I speak briefly? Judge Henry Alvarez. You may, but remember, you are under oath. Ava Turner. I sat on that bench. I have the memory of the person walking away and the sound of the doors closing. The footage aligns with my recollection. Mark Bennett. Objection. The witness is not an expert on video interpretation. Judge Henry Alvarez. The jury will decide the weight of the testimony. Sustained in part. Motion granted to move forward. There were a series of calls and cross-examinations that ran for hours more. One crucial turning point in court was a witness called by Mark Bennett, who had appeared to corroborate a story about a hasty transfer. He was a neighbor who had claimed to see a child leave with another family. Lila cross-examined him, and by showing inconsistencies in time and place, and by introducing Thomas's timesheets, she undermined his credibility. That unraveling helped tip the balance. Another tension-charged scene happened when a childhood foster intake form surfaced that had a signature similar to my biological mother, but dated the week after my disappearance. The signature was analyzed by an expert in question documents. The expert showed the court the differences with magnified images and explained the characteristics that indicated forgery. The courtroom listened to the clicking of slides being changed, and the expert's precise vocabulary became a weapon in our forensic arsenal. The court heard about pressure strokes, pen lifts, and ink density. It was forensic language, but accessible enough to be persuasive. The day the jury retired to deliberate felt like an eternity. In my chest, there was a thudding that matched the courthouse clock. I walked to the gallery and sat with Carlos, with Denise, and with Lila. There were small, private exchanges, many of them messier than the public statements, but essential. The following is a condensed exchange that captured the private strain. Carlos Gonzalez. You good? Ava Turner. Nauseous, but grounded. Denise Coleman. You have given them everything. You told the truth. Ava Turner. What if truth is not enough? Lila Shaw. Truth backed by evidence is enough in court. You must trust that. Ava Turner. I trust you. Carlos Gonzalez. Then let us have patience. Denise Coleman. The people who loved Thomas will testify if needed. Thank you. When the verdict came, it felt like a release and a reclaiming at once. The jury found in favor of the trust and denied the petition for distribution to biological parents on grounds of insufficient proof of wrongdoing by Thomas. They found Thomas had acted within his guardianship role, that he had capacity to create the trust, and that the transfer was not the result of undue influence. The judge, in his ruling, spoke about the weight of testimony and the chain of custody that ensured the authenticity of exhibits. He awarded damages for the filing of frivolous suits and found that the attempt to appropriate the trust was without merit. Public reaction was immediate. Rachel Kim wrote a measured piece about the sentence and the judge's findings. People who had sent condolences wrote to say congratulations. Some letters were less generous. But out of the tumult, I had to decide what to do with the result. The inheritance sat in a trust with stipulations for educational and shelter work. I could have kept it for my own security. Thomas had never intended money to orbit celebrity. He wanted the gifts used to protect children. In deciding how to honor that, I consulted with several community leaders, including Aaron Brooks, Leela Shaw, Mateo Cruz, Carlos Gonzalez, and a local nonprofit director named Sofia Mendez. The epilogue of the story unfolds in 3 timeframes. 1 month after the verdict, I registered a nonprofit called the Reed Foundation for Children. We rented a small office above a bakery that smelled of yeast and sugar. The foundation began as a referral service to connect kids in emergency placements with pro bono legal counsel and rapid response foster resources. At 3 months, we launched a pilot program in partnership with the county social services to provide emergency funds to guardians who took a child in overnight and could not afford supplies. We paid for cribs, winter coats, registration fees for school, and legal consultations. We tracked numbers. In that 3rd month, the foundation helped 10 families avoid formal foster placement by funding temporary kinship support. At 6 months, the foundation had a dedicated staff of 6, introduced a scholarship for children aging out of care, and had a legal clinic where Leela volunteered twice a week. We published an impact report that showed measurable outcomes. 25 children received emergency support, and 4 young adults received scholarships for technical school. We published the report in a way that honored data and narrative, because numbers without faces are abstract, and faces without context can be misunderstood. The decision to create the Reed Foundation was not only sentimental, it was legal. Part of the trust required public accountability for funds used for charitable purposes. We created a board with diverse members, including Mateo Cruz for fiscal oversight, Sofia Mendez for program direction, Aaron Brooks for community liaison, and an independent attorney named Julian Park to ensure governance practices. We published transparency reports and opened our files to auditing. Transparency was a shield against future claims and a promise to the community that the work would remain rooted in service, not spectacle. Through this process, I encountered a painful realization about abandonment and about choice. Abandonment is an event. It is an act someone does or does not do in a single moment. The aftermath of abandonment is 1,000 small choices by different people that shape a life. Some of those choices are protective, like the ones Thomas made. Some are opportunistic, like the ones my biological parents made when they saw a chance for financial gain. The legal fight made public and intimate hurt, but it also allowed me to push the conversation toward systemic changes. I began to testify before a county committee about gaps in notification for parents at risk, about the need for better documentation at temporary placements, and about a streamlined emergency assistance fund. Law does not replace love, but law can create infrastructure that prevents harm. There were late-night moments when I questioned my path. I sat alone on our back porch at 2 a.m, the summer air humid and heavy, the dog asleep at my feet, and I thought about the child who had waited on a bench. Could I have done more? Should I have reached out sooner to my biological parents with compassion rather than legal distance? These questions mattered, and they still do. I chose to hold boundaries and to pursue accountability because what I had at stake was not only money, but the memory of a man who chose to stay when others left. Along the way, I named and recorded lessons. First, documentation matters. The mall security tape, the bank records, the notarized drafts of the trust, and the social services intake forms were decisive. Second, community matters. Without Carlos, Denise, Aaron, and Mateo testifying, the story would have fewer anchors. Third, systems must be designed to protect children, not to create hazy paths for opportunism. My work as an attorney shifted. I moved from individual cases to systemic advocacy. I began organizing workshops for guardians, training for social workers on preserving evidence, and working with legislators to draft clearer protocols for emergency placement record keeping. There were personal financial decisions as well. Upon advice from Leela and Mateo, we allocated the trust in 3 parts: operational funds for the foundation, a scholarship endowment, and a reserve for legal support for children in contested placements. The foundation provides grants and legal clinics and partners with existing shelters rather than duplicating services. We also created an advisory council that includes former foster youth and guardians so that decisions are informed by lived experience. The foundation's name honors Thomas without making him a martyr. It acknowledges the quiet choices ordinary people make to keep others safe. As this narrative closes, I want to return to the smallest details that began it. The rabbit with one ear is repaired now. I keep it in a drawer and sometimes take it out to show young children who come to the foundation how things can be mended. I held the rabbit up in court as a small prop to humanize the facts and to remind the room what had begun this fight. It is both trivial and powerful. The object held a memory, and the memory helped a jury see that the person who had raised me had made a deliberate choice to provide safety, and that choice deserved legal recognition. If you are watching this and you have a memory of being left behind or of being the one who stayed, know this: you are not defined just by what was done to you. You are shaped by what you choose afterward. The Reed Foundation is one attempt to turn a painful inheritance into public good. We publish our impact transparently. We offer resources on our website that include legal guides, emergency checklists, and contacts for support. If this story touched you, consider leaving a comment. Tell us what part moved you most. Did the abandonment, the will, the courtroom drama, or the foundation resonate with you? Begin your comment with the words, "The part that moved me most was," so others can find similar experiences. Your words help build a community, and they help shape future work that might prevent another child from waiting alone on a bench. If you are moved to support the work we do, there is a link below to the Reed Foundation, where you can donate or volunteer. We also have a legal clinic calendar posted for free consultations and a resource sheet for people navigating contested guardianship matters. If you want to follow more stories like this, consider subscribing. We gather true narratives where individuals turn trauma into systemic change and provide practical steps for viewers who want to help. This story has several endings at once. The court handed down a verdict that affirmed Thomas's intent and protected the trust. The foundation opened its doors and began to serve. My relationships with my biological parents remain complicated. They apologized publicly after the verdict, but the apology did not remove years of absence. I accept an apology as a start, but not as a replacement for care. The public conversation that grew around the case has led to a county memo revising emergency placement documentation and to a new pilot fund modeled after the foundation that provides immediate support to kinship caregivers. These are imperfect victories, but they are real. In the end, I learned that justice is not solely a legal result. Justice is a practice that requires documentation, courage, and community. It is the daily work of showing up for others and building structures that outlast a single person. Thomas gave me the most unexpected inheritance, the certainty that someone chose to stay. With the trust and with the lawsuit behind us, I chose to invest that legacy in others who still wait on benches. Under the hum of mall speakers, we are building something that can change the story for a child in need tomorrow. If this story has touched you, join us. We are stronger when we turn pain into purpose. We are more humane when we turn abandonment into action. We are defined not by what was taken from us, but by what we choose to do with what we are given.